Ryan, welcome to the podcast. Super excited to work with you today, man. For people who aren't familiar with you and all the amazing stuff you're doing in the athletic space, would you mind filling them in a little bit about what you have going on there, man?
Yeah. My name is Ryan Patrick. I own Peak Fitness and Sports Training and have run that for the last 15 going on 16 years. And we are located in Erlanger, Kentucky, which really is just outside of Cincinnati, Ohio. So very, very northern part of Kentucky. And we work primarily with high school athletes. We've had some professional athletes in the past due to the Cincinnati Reds and the Cincinnati Bengals being in the area. But my bread and butter is definitely the high school and developing athletes. So it's personal passion of mine. A lot of impact with these kids. We're fortunate enough to live in an area where I think the athletic scene is just on the up and up. So we've got so many more athletes that are going to college for sports now relative to when I was on the come up. I mean, if we had somebody going D1, it was a spectacle. And now, I mean, there's just handfuls of kids from number of high schools in our local area that are going to that level. So that's what I've been doing, just working in the private sector.
I know that's absolutely incredible, man. And it's interesting to hear you say that because I grew up in small town, middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania. And same thing. It was a big deal if athletes were going D3 from where we were.
Yeah.
And now it's like you look at it and it's like, man, like that's the thing in the past. It's like, oh my goodness, we have this girl that goes D1 for track and field. Like that's a big deal in a
Mhm.
town like that. And obviously, I think a lot of that has come as a result of the advancements being made in the athlete training and just how engaging it can be, right? Like there was a time when I think, even when I was in high school, just reflecting back, like a lot of kids didn't like the weight room, whether they're
Mhm.
football or whatever sport that way. They just didn't enjoy it. And it's like, when did we lose the fun in literally like moving our body and getting better at whatever it is we're doing, right? Like, I think everyone, at least I hope everyone has had that experience of recess in elementary school when it's like you go out, you run around, you sprint, you cut and change direction. And somehow amidst all of that, it's fun and engaging. And at some point
Mhm.
along the like athlete development pipeline, I feel like we almost like lose that recess element of it, if you will. It starts to become serious. And a lot of people just check out when that transition happens, I find.
Yeah, there's definitely a surge of organized activity that's creeping into younger and younger ages. And so we'll get a number of athletes who, maybe good at their sport at, age 14 or whatever. They're on their ones or twos team at their club. And that's very respectable. But, we look at them and they're just physically underwhelming. I feel like there's a lack of athletic creativeness when it comes to problem solving and movement variability and actually creating deception or feints or getting around someone. So and I compare that to when, I was on the come up. I mean, we still played outside. We rode our bikes everywhere. Now all the kids have electric scooters. And this sounds like I'm shaking my fist from my front lawn. But things have changed. And, inside of that, my friends have kids that are, 10 years old now, and they're way more skilled juggling a soccer ball than I ever was, even, as a senior in high school. So it's incredible to see kind of this um, dual-sided nature of it, right? Just a specialist when it comes to certain skills related to the activity, but also kind of um, just generally deficient.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to put it. I mean, I look at it like this to the point you made. Athletes are highly specialized in their specific sport because of that effect from a young age, but they
Mhm.
miss all of that typical, stereotypical GPP type stuff that we talk about. Like, as you mentioned, they can dribble a soccer ball, they can kick a soccer ball 60 yards, but you ask them to do a body weight squat and look out. It's not anything like you
Yeah.
expect it to be. The other one that I've noticed a lot is some of these different athletes that come from different backgrounds, they lack like literally the ability to sprint. And it's like if you look at them in sport when they have like their implement either in hand or whatever that way, and they're doing the sport task, like dribbling a soccer ball or carrying a lacrosse ball, they look like a stud athlete. Remove that from them, take the stick out of their hands, take the ball away from their feet, and all of a sudden that sprint looks like they're like a lost dog just trying to figure out where to go. It just looks very unorganized. And it's like, have we done so much sprint work and so much work in the sport that we literally have forgotten how to do these simple basic motions that all people, in my opinion, should be able to do without that implement in hand or at the feet that way. And it's fascinating to me. And I think it creates this conversation around we can actually produce better athletes by teaching them more general qualities in the weight room and from a performance standpoint than continuing to add to that specificity element. I think at the end of the day, athletes need to be problem solvers. Look at like
Mhm.
Pat Mahomes is probably the best example of this. The amount of different ways he solves the problems on the football field. Like I'm constantly amazed by what he's doing, but it's like you've got a multi-sport background and a dude that trains in so many unique different ways. Of course he's going to be able to do that. Like he's someone that can express movement in a million different ways as opposed to just 10. And yeah, it's nice to have those 10 movement patterns that are dug a mile deep and an inch wide. But at the same token, I think there's potentially some value in being a mile wide and an inch deep with some things.
Yeah, especially early on in development. The brain is essentially a prediction machine. And so the more varied inputs that we can have into that, the more affordances or movement options that an athlete is going to have. And somewhere in some continuing education, there was this picture of, it's down on the field level in an NFL game. And it's like, okay, it's kind of from the perspective of a running back. You're about to make this break, and you can see there's clearly, one more defender to beat, and you got a couple guys blocking off to the side, and it's like, what movement options do you have available to you? Can you beat this guy to the outside? Are you quick enough to cut back in? If you're Saquon Barkley, maybe you can just straight up jump the guy backwards, And so I think just getting athletes as much input as possible, and that's why our kind of battle cry is, play multi-sport as long as you can, play outside, have unstructured play. But the reality is, sometimes we're getting these athletes in their teenage years, and we can't really go back in time and start to do that. And for me, we've got kids that are fast, and to your point, fast with a stick, fast with the ball in their hands, with the ball at their feet, but they just lack the ability to skip or do an A skip or look rhythmic, find timing, find bounce. And so, you know, eh, as much as I love the intellectual rabbit holes of this industry, and I think it keeps me stimulated in some ways, our training becomes very, very basic. And, I want kids to be able to express, just control and competency in some very basic movement patterns that are potentially filling some empty buckets for them, right? Just things they haven't done. And so that's kind of what it becomes. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. I think if we could, really change the game, we would, kind of creep our way younger and younger, and our training would look more like the play and unstructured stuff. If Jeremy Frisch, he's like the best example of youth development. But from where I operate, I don't have the staff, the space, or the systems to really implement that kind of training alongside some of the older developing athletes we have who are maybe considering a career in college athletics. And so it's certainly a challenge. You have to have, I think, people in our field who are passionate about that, who really want to work with that population. And believe me, a lot of 6 to 10 year olds running around can be chaotic. So I have a lot of respect for those people, but I think we can still do a lot of just giving athletes scenarios that are helping them athletically.
Absolutely. I could not agree more. And as you mentioned, there's only so many hours in the day and there's only so many sessions per week that you get with the athletes that way. And if you're in a private facility, I'm going to assume it's usually somewhere between 2 and 4 times a week in that general range. That tends to be
Yeah.
what I see with a lot of different programs and stuff that way. So it's like, how do you maximize your time with those athletes when, hey, you're literally being paid to get results? And it's not
Mhm.
just a matter of results that you like it's not just a matter of, oh, hey, we saw 10% improvement on the force plates, or we saw this improvement in ground contact time on the jump mat, whatever it is that way. It's like it has to be results that the parents and coaches and the people that write the checks at the end of the day for these
Mhm.
kind of trainings also see and also want to continue to come back for. So what does that look like for you from your overall session flow and training style with some of these younger athletes? Because I think everyone, and I'm guilty of this as well, everyone wants to talk about the college and the pro athletes and all the amazing training they're doing right now
Mhm.
because they've made it. But no one ever really, or very few people actually, look back and reflect on what actually got them there. And obviously that's where you live, is getting athletes to that level or helping them get to that level. So what does that overall flow and structure look like for you on the week to week?
Yeah, so you're asking about the session structure and how we're kind of planning training for these athletes. So again, just want to clarify, we start at around 12 years old. Sometimes we'll go a little bit younger based on the kid. Um, and to your point, I think the validation for a lot of parents comes in the form of certain metrics, right? They're jumping higher, their sprint times are decreasing, and this can quickly become a trap. Because if you start chasing this measure as the outcome goal, like I need this athlete to sprint as fast as possible, without regard for any other variables, then I think you're kind of chasing the wrong thing. Ultimately, our goal is to build robust athletes who are available for their sport, can tolerate the stress of training and competition, and continue to train the skill side of their sport to improve their athletic prowess. And so if I don't prepare my athlete for that, well, we're already kind of missing the mark, because at the end of the day, this training is really an accessory to the crime. We are something to enhance the physical development of the athlete, to kind of take that off the table. And I think we can equalize this among a lot of athletes. At a certain point, um, you're going to be sufficiently athletic to dominate the sport. And, if you look across sports, it's not just who has, you know, the most, the heaviest squad is going to get the most rushing yards this year. Now, certainly those guys are very, very strong. But there's not a one-to-one correlation. So I think we have to just respect kind of what we're chasing. And inside of that, think about the athlete as a whole. Now, how do you quantify the creativity or the movement adaptability of an athlete? We've tried to use proxy measures for movement variability, right? How much total hip rotation do you have? What does that allow you to do from a position standpoint? What positions can you get in? How much rotation and load, into your hip when you're making a cut can you do? And certainly we can make some leaps and some inferences about this, but again, it's a really hard thing to distill. So when we think about how we're preparing these athletes for the next level, it really comes down to, things that we can quantify that I think are, known with best practices and the history of us, of anybody doing training, that are actually going to improve the likelihood of certain outcomes for our athletes. And so one of the things that I think is a big discriminator is speed, and not just necessarily top end speed, but as my athletes go from, their middle school club teams to JV, varsity, and on to college, the game is going to get faster. And if it's baseball, those guys throw harder. Soccer athletes faster, basketball athletes jump higher. We know that there are certain physical prerequisites that are going to give them the best opportunity to play at that level. And so we want to make sure that we're taking that off the table. Not every athlete needs to be, the strongest person or maximize all these stats. For some kids, just it's not going to be possible. Some kids are never going to jump, 40 inches. It's not a reality. That doesn't mean that they can't be successful, as a college basketball player, but we have to recognize there's probably a limitation to this. And so what we want to do is maximize those capabilities in a holistic way, sufficient strength so that they have the tensile strength to resist a lot of the forces in whatever sport they're playing, that they have adequate endurance and stamina so that, fatigue isn't an issue and potentially leading to injury. We want to make sure that they've got sufficient speed for what needs to happen at that level. And so when we think about it like that, it becomes, I believe, a lot more manageable, because now I'm not trying to make, a track star and a power lifter, the guy who runs the fastest and lifts the most and does one specific, narrow slice of performance at the highest level, but we're trying to develop this athlete in a holistic sense. And so, that is going to give them, I believe, the opportunity to really focus on the skill that's going to help separate them at that level. Because ultimately, that is going to be the differentiators, how much skill you have for your sport. And, we've seen this with different tools. So, for example, we have the Proteus. And if you're not familiar with the Proteus, I just describe it as like a 3D robotic arm with a handle. And so you can just move it around in space. It's got resistance whichever way you go. One of the things that they found in one of their early white papers that they released was that, there's a big performance bump from high school to college, but not quite so much from the college to the pros in certain rotational movements. Okay. Certain rotational power. We'll just kind of simplify it. And so what that was saying is like once you get the physical stuff off the table, it's skill that really creates the separation between, the elite and the just the sub elite. And so from the perspective of physical development, again, this is a general preparation for the athlete. It is designed to enhance their ability to work on sporting success. And I think once we got that in mind, and stopped overstating our importance and understanding our role in positioning these athletes to be successful, I feel that it became a lot easier. But again, I'll kind of circle back to the beginning. It can be sometimes you can start chasing these metrics and these goals. Like we wear the bracelets 15, 20, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21 miles an hour club because it's cool and athletes like it. But if that becomes the only metric we're tracking, I think we start to miss out on what these athletes need to really pursue success at the next level.
I cannot agree more. I mean, I've cited this a lot lately, but at the end of the day, Goodhart's law holds true, right? When the measure becomes the target, it ceases to become a good measure. So
Mhm,
if your measure is top end speed in a straight line, linear kind of thing, and that's the only thing that you care about and value, it is no longer a good thing. It no longer has value. And to the point you made from the holistic standpoint, I think coaches often underappreciate how much impact they can have on the athlete.
mhm,
And thinking about speed, for example, with that holistic lens, speed, as you mentioned, is more than just running in a straight line really fast. There's an
mhm,
acceleration component. How quickly do you get to your top end speed compared to someone else? But also the change direction speed is drastically different as well. How quickly can you stop and change direction on a dime? Can you do that faster than your opponent? Because they might be
mhm,
faster than you in a straight line, but if you can cut and change direction faster than them, you can, do that break the ankles or whatever the freaking trendy term is nowadays, and you're gone. And I think that coaches have this ability to highlight those things and catch those things and make athletes aware of those things. So as you mentioned, hey, maybe they can play into their strengths a little bit more. Or hey, maybe we catch these things at age 12, 13, 14, and now we can develop that, but also develop those areas of your game that you're lacking so that when you are 18, when the college coaches and scouts are coming your way and knocking on the door, you've become a complete athlete because you've been developing for so long that nothing was missed, right? But again, going off of that, it just makes me think of a story Eric Lichter shared on the podcast earlier this year, comparing two football players, Ted Ginn and Beanie. And he was talking about how one is great from a linear speed. And, if you get him to top end speed, no one's catching him. And the other is really good from an acceleration standpoint. So both incredible athletes, but both gifted or trained or developed a little bit differently in the sense that their gameplay and game styles are different, but they both have unique advantages that kind of tie in under that speed umbrella, if you will, and allow them to do things that other athletes can't. And I think if you allow athletes to pick up on that from an early age, like they just start to develop their style of play around that strength because it's like, oh my goodness, like I never thought about this. Like I'm really good at X, so I'm gonna do X a lot, right? Like if it's
mhm.
soccer, it's like, oh, I have a really good ability to stop and cut and change direction at a real sharp angle better than anyone else. So that's going to be the thing I do. That's going to be how I get around people. On the flip side, I've also seen athletes that are just so freaking fast that they literally just airball it over the top in a sport like soccer every time and they're gone. No one can catch them
Mhm.
and it works. But if you don't understand what your strengths are and you don't understand how to develop them and continue to progress them over time, you miss the mark on that completely, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think a lot of that circles back to, how are we evaluating these athletes? I really think of our role as strength and conditioning coaches is to fill empty buckets. Are we giving athletes the things that they're not getting from their sport? We know basketball guys and volleyball athletes are jumping a ton. How much more jumping do we need to do to improve what their outputs are? Probably not a lot. And in some cases, it might even be disadvantageous. So I've seen in the past, we've kept just, slightly more volume than maybe we had previously, just testing a few things out. And we started noticing kids were coming up with shin splints, right? It was just too much. We weren't able to recover. So there are other things and other avenues that we can get. If we understand, to your point, what their strengths are and where maybe the high leverage points are, then we can pull on those levers and create changes that are meaningful for the athlete and give them certain capabilities, or at least augment the capabilities that they have so that they can perform, at a slightly higher level.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I like that concept about filling empty buckets that way. And I think part of that becomes being able to look at yourself as a coach or clinician or whatever that way and understand like what kind of things that you just have a tendency to give athletes because you like them. I'm very guilty of this. Like I love pull-ups. So my quirk is I think all athletes should be able to do pull-ups. Not every athlete really needs to do pull-ups. Like there's acceptable swaps, row variations, lat pull downs, and so on that way. But I think some of it becomes making sure that you're always doing what the athlete probably needs the most and what is best serving them and not necessarily just what you like. I mean, the other thing that comes to mind for me is I love a big squat. There's something about
Mhm.
being able to squat big weight. I think it's a great way to express lower body strength and really just total body ability to like coordinate movement because it's complex when you look at it. Like when you actually look at it, it's not just the hip, knee, and ankle. It's also the trunk. It's also the shoulders to a certain extent. There's a lot more involved in it. And I like that a lot. But, there's some athletes that it's like they don't need to squat cheeks to heels every time. And I need to be okay with that.
Yeah. We've had some athletes like, our baseball guys. We've had a few that have, backs that have just had a history of some stress factors, right? A lot of rotation through the sport. There's a lot of extension. When you go into too much extension, whether it's an aggressive anterior pelvic tilt or you're just locking it in for stability, you don't have a lot of rotation. So not a super useful strategy for those guys who are trying to throw gas. And we've had a couple of these athletes where we've tried to squat them very unsuccessfully. It hurt them. And it kind of got to a point like, damn, like we're barely lifting any weight now because this is what feels good. And we switched them to a rear foot elevated split squat. And all of a sudden they're doing, three quarters of the load of what their max would be, but on a single leg now. And so, that allowed to some really meaningful outputs in terms of developing strength. And, I just told them like maybe squatting is not for you. And that's totally okay. You don't have to squat to be successful. Now, I'm like you, I love a squat. And my athletes that can do that, like I want to retain that ability. But I've also seen some stuff, that kind of passes the test of, yeah, they squatted, but maybe their hips are a little shifty. Maybe they're twisting, in a way that's unfavorable. And so, again, that becomes an assessment in and of itself. Like, why is this happening? Is it a magnitude or just a load issue? Is it an underlying deficit in some kind of rotation at the hips, knees, ankles, spine that's, leading to these compensations? What does that mean for, how you're throwing the ball or how you're changing direction? Do we see this kind of happen in other domains as well? And so it just becomes a line of inquiry that we can use to make some training related decisions for our athletes. But overall, I mean, it doesn't have to be a drastic change in terms of what the intervention is. It could be, it could be a really simple solution. And that's it's one of the things that I really try to emphasize because, as I get carried away with my continuing education and cool things pop up, like whether it's Alex Natera's isometrics or you name it, there's tons of new things that are coming at me. But at the end of the day, most of my athletes need very simple solutions. And even the highest level athletes that we've had have done very simple exercises. It's just that they do the common things uncommonly well. And I think overall that gives them the capacity and the bandwidth to do their sport at the level that they need to.
Yeah, boy, I love that. Doing the common things uncommonly well or the uncommon things commonly well, whatever it is that way. I love that
Mhm.
phrase. And it's interesting because as you were talking, I was thinking about some of these different athlete cases I've seen and just how in the past I have had a tendency to overcomplicate things when I was first out of school, right? Your first 3 to 6 months, I know everyone gives you the degree and you got the whatever credentials and you just think you run the world. Like I've been there and I quickly realized like a lot of the problems that are coming to me are solved with simple solutions, not the complex ones. And I think Occam's razor holds true at the end of the day. But one of the things that's still constantly debated in the space, and I don't have the best answer for it. I think it's a healthy balance of both and case dependent, if you will. But a lot of times people argue over, hey, should the movement pattern that we're looking at, whether that's the sprint, the squat, whatever, should it be, quote unquote, mechanically correct, free of whatever compensation pattern or whatever that way before we build it up and before we load it? Or are we accepting a little bit of, hey, it's not picture perfect because, picture perfect for one athlete is drastically different than the next. And we're just going to progress and load it. And I think it's always a balance between progressing a movement pattern versus like getting it mechanically correct. Again, whatever mechanically correct means or looks like for that athlete. But I'm interested to hear your thoughts on it because I think the other piece too is there's other ways to progress a movement. Like you gave the single leg example. There's other ways to progress a movement than just adding more load on a bar.
Yeah, I think historically, um, strength training has kind of fallen in love with add 5 pounds to the bar, add 5 pounds to the bar. It's a very easy thing to track. It's easy to see progress. It's rewarding for the athlete. But what if, say, we're squatting and the squat goes from a, more upright posture where we're loading quads, glutes, to something that's more hingy. And now, we're loading a significant degree of the posterior change. Is it the same squat? Are we loading the same muscles in the same way through the same range? It's kind of a thought experiment. I don't have an answer on that. But what I will say, let's use sprinting, for example. We pull a lot of straight line sprinting stuff from the track world. So it's just kind of the progression of, I think what happens. Like when we started really looking at strength training for athletes, it was heavily influenced by powerlifting and by Olympic lifting. Those were two kind of sports unto themselves that we knew the strongest athletes and the most powerful athletes were doing this. And so we want to take that. And I think some people got too far down this rabbit hole, too a little bit too west side with the athletes, right? And we're like, oh, maybe this level of strength is not quite as useful as we thought for athletes, but there's some value in what we're doing. And so right now I'm seeing this with sprinting, where we're modeling a lot of what the track athletes are doing. I think that's great. They're the fastest athletes in the world. But again, our athletes run curved runs, they have change of directions, they have decelerations, they have a lot of other things that we're looking for. But I think what we can say, my soccer athletes might not run like a track athlete. But when we look at acceleration and we look at top speed, there are invariant attractor states. There are certain positional things that we expect to happen that are going to happen within a bandwidth for an athlete, given their physical capabilities, given their, anthropometrics, so just the size and structure of their body, that we expect to happen. In acceleration, we expect some kind of forward lean of the body. We expect, ideally, some kind of neutrality between the pelvis. We expect from step to step that the pelvic height should rise, that inclination is going to become more and more vertical. We know these things happen, but how it happens, athlete to athlete, might be nuanced, it might be a little varied. And so we start trying to pick apart a lot of these little details first without understanding the big picture. I think it makes it difficult to really make assessments because now we're splitting hairs, we're going through things with a fine tooth comb, when really we need to look at these kind of big attractor states. And so when I look at sprinting, my very first thing is, not what's the tangential foot speed of this athlete, it's globally what is happening. Like if I blur the camera and I'm just watching this athlete run, are they moving forward aggressively in space step to step? Are they actually putting sufficient force on the ground to move their center of mass aggressively across the screen? If they're not, like, we probably need to work on that. They probably need more force producing potential. They probably need some kind of, hill run so they can learn to push because they're going to be fighting gravity a little harder. Whatever it is, there's plenty of solutions. Then I'll start to look at, okay, you know, this athlete is, we understand they're moving across the screen. Now we can start to look at maybe some of the mechanics. So, you know, centrally or proximally, what's happening, at the trunk, at the thorax, and at the pelvis? Are they, what's the agreement like between them as they transition from acceleration to upright running? And then we can start to look distally. What's happening at the limbs? How are they exchanging in space? And I think sometimes people start kind of at the back end with these little granular details and miss the big picture. And so to kind of answer your question, like, is there a textbook form? Certainly, but I mean, again, even if we use like a strength training example and squatting, my basketball guys with their, limb length compared to torso relationship and my squattier like soccer players, they squat very differently. And that's okay. But if you understand what you're getting and what you're conceding with certain variations in technique, you can kind of program around to hit the muscles, excuse me, the way that you want throughout the training session. But it just comes with understanding we can't fit everybody to this mold. But at the same time, we know there are invariant attractor states that are going to happen with each technique. And we just need to probably monitor those before we get too detailed.
Absolutely. I love that we're going into the motor learning side and maybe a little dynamic systems theory sprinkle here. Like,
Yeah.
my goodness, this is going to get me going this morning. I love it. It's interesting because as you were talking, going back to that concept of dynamic systems and attractor states, like I think one of the things that I didn't fully appreciate after the motor learning courses I took in school that way was that systems can, in theory anyways, I mean, I think it's true, but in theory, just for technical lingo here, those systems that we're talking about in athletics can spontaneously create new patterns and new solutions without being programmed. And I think that's where kind of we started some of this conversation is it's like, hey, some of those general qualities help athletes improve their abilities to literally develop a brand new attractor state on the fly. It's like, hey, this is the way we've always done things 98% of the time. But all of a sudden, this new obstacle comes our way in sport. We have to adapt to it. And we literally have the ability to abandon that attractor state and create a new one on the fly and go all in on that new one. Like that flexibility piece is so, so essential, in my opinion, and yet so overlooked or so difficult to assess. Like you mentioned before about measures and metrics, like you can't put a single force plate measure or metric to someone's ability to literally abandon a tractor state and spontaneously create a new one in relation to how they move
Mhm.
in relation to solve a specific movement problem that's just spontaneously thrown at them. Like if anyone finds a way to measure that, please give me a call. Would love to collaborate with you
Yeah.
on the work that way. But like it just doesn't exist to this point. And I think this is another state where coaches can really display their value in working with athletes is your ability to pick up on those trends and patterns, those states that athletes tend to fall into. So I think you made like the sprinting and the squat examples again, like, when an athlete is going to be sprinting, do they have a like certain stride and certain hip position, like you mentioned, the neutral pelvis in
Mhm.
weightlifting? Do they have a tendency to maybe they like pitch forward a little bit as they start to increase the weight on the squat? And there's these predictable patterns that exist over and over and over again. But you can start to pick up on, hey, what happens when I modify this one thing? And I don't care if
Mhm.
it's a cue, if it's like some kind of implementation modification, right? Like, hey, we're gonna front squat instead of back squat, or we're gonna try slant boards and just see like what changes occur from that. Like it allows you to kind of become more of a detective, investigator, problem solver than just throw more weight on the bar. Which it's interesting to me because I like to be both. I like to have that meathead element of just put more weight on and lift heavier.
Mhm.
But at the same time, it's also fun, especially when athletes are coming to you with unique problems relating to performance, to kind of dig in a little bit deeper and see like, hey, what can we change? Like, how stable is this attractor well? Like, if we're looking again at that squat example, if I elevate their heels slightly, or if I just take them out of their shoes, is that enough to disturb the system and create a whole different movement pattern? Or are
Right.
they so well locked into that state that no matter what I do, it's the exact same movement every time? And I think having that lens to look through is unique and often overlooked in the space.
Yeah, some of this circles back to the earlier conversation about these athletes not having as much exposure, right? So, I think about the lack of creativity and how much maybe these athletes go to tournaments on the weekend and do, they play their sport a ton. But there might be a specific scenario or situation that this athlete struggles with. Maybe they're getting trapped in the corner, and this basketball example, they're getting trapped in the corner and they're not sure how to pivot effectively and step through and pass the ball. How many times are they going to get exposed to that in competitive play? A couple. Compared to athletes who maybe train and work on this specific task, they're able to get a lot of different exposures. They're able to see this and start to problem solve. And so they develop just a greater lens of adaptability because they've seen this scenario. They've been in a situation that is at once overcoming and maybe overwhelming for them, or uncomfortable and overwhelming. And now they're like they have movement solutions and understand how to solve this problem, whatever it is. And I also think about like when I was growing up, real young, we kind of lived in the hood. And so just everyone got together and played basketball in my driveway. And, it was a one lane for a car with what the house was, lining the one side. So you got a wall. And we'd have, I mean, I think I was third, fourth grade at the time, maybe. So 10. And we'd have kids that were in their teenage years, and we'd all just play basketball together. Well, when you go against guys who are that overwhelming and that overpowering, you have to get really creative with how you're getting around them, right? It's like trying to wrestle your uncle. They're just so dominant that you're just trying to like juke and get around them and shoot a double somehow, or it leads to creativity and to trying new things and stepping outside of what are maybe these stable attractor states and developing new movement solutions. And again, I think a lot of it just goes back to, are we giving these athletes exposure? To your point, we start playing games, we start having fun, we start changing variables. It allows athletes to kind of explore and get out of these just consistent and repetitive and overly curated movement sequences that maybe are sufficient for sport, but just don't help when there's chaos, which is pretty
Right.
much a sport in general, right?
Right, and it's interesting because, like, on the gamification piece for a second, like, I think everyone always thinks you need to be, like, some expert at creativity type things, you need all this equipment and stuff, and it's like, look, if you have the people, the athletes, if you have a ball and you have space, you can figure it out. Like, you can literally figure it out from there with whatever you have as long as you have a few base things, and it's like, ultimately, you just add or remove constraints based on what adaptations you want to develop in the athlete, right? Like,
Mhm.
literally take a sport like soccer. Like, literally, if you want to develop more of a passing game in the sport of soccer, okay, cool. Hey, we're going to scrimmage, but you have to hit 20 consecutive passes in a row before you're allowed to shoot. Like, new constraint
Mhm.
completely changes the way the game is played just by making some small little on the fly adaptation. And it's like you take that same concept now, apply it to the sprinting, apply it to anything else you do with your athletes. And literally, just by changing the rules of the game, if you will, you can take the same concept or the same sport or the same whatever and get 20, 30, 40 different
Mhm.
adaptations just by changing small things like that.
Yeah, if I've got a kid with an AC, let's say a right ACL, and we got our turf, it's 15 feet wide, so about 5 yards wide, and we got yard lines every 5 yards, so we can make a 5 by 5 box. I'll go in there and, okay, you got a right ACL. The rule is right-handed tag. Okay, so you got to learn the reach. They're gonna learn quick how to like step and cut off that right foot because of the constraint, right? And now it's fun. Now we're kind of playing. Maybe I throw another athlete in there, but we can do it in such a way where they're not having to react or be defensive yet. They're kind of more the proactive part of it, and so it gives them um, the knowledge of how and when they're going to make this jab step and this cut. And so it's a little bit more predictable for them and they're able to create that pre-tension that's going to save the knee. But at the same time, it's a great way to introduce some fun and give them just kind of varied exposure to angles and, um, just reps of cutting off of that right foot.
And you can scale that over time so
Oh,
easily.
yeah.
I like one of the things we talk about a lot in the lower extremity return to play on the podcast is the value of the walkthrough. And it's like, hey, look, like there's literally been teams that I've, worked with athletes from. They tell me, yeah, day before a game, we go out in the practice, we don't run, we don't sprint, we literally just line up and walk through what we'd be doing at a walking pace. Now it's like someone's 3 months out from ACL and they're starting to jump, starting to run. Are we okay with them literally just walking through, "Hey, if I was on the field,
Yeah.
this is where I would be." Like, and
Mhm.
to the point you made in relation to tag, like, are we okay with, "Hey, you're going to walk, but I want it to be like literally a game of tag that is done while walking," which like,
Mhm.
I'm sure some people will push the limits to walking, we'll start to turn some of these field sport athletes into competitive race walkers, I guess. But it's like it's such a simple concept of like,
Mhm.
literally just regress or progress the same activity, and you're able to solve nearly any problem that you have that way. Or I think you can, anyways.
Yeah, I mean, how many reels have we seen on Sports Center where it's, coach versus athlete in the locker room and they're doing those one-on-one walking receiving drills where they're trying to juke each other just walking. I mean, those are hilarious, but I mean, you can see even at that pace how people can create deception and evasion, but I always enjoy watching those.
I agree with you, Ryan, and I feel like this is probably a conversation we could continue all day long. This is just
Mhm.
such a fun way to start my day that way. Is there anything we missed as we were chatting or anything else you wanted to share with people listening?
Yeah, if they would like to follow me, I'm mostly on Instagram. It's at Coach Ryan Patrick. I also host a podcast called the Athletic Performance Podcast. So with that, we kind of go from everything nerdy. We got some researchers on there, so we kind of dive deep into the science, and then talk to a lot of practitioners like myself as well. So very fun conversations. Would love for you guys to join in on that.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll link to all of that in the description below. That way, if you didn't quite catch it, you can just click there and see everything Ryan is up to. Ryan, this was awesome, dude. Really appreciate your time and everything.
Thanks a lot, man.